Well, welcome, Nat. I'm so excited to bring you on to Core Connections and get to talk all about hormone health, gut health, and all the things related to women's health, really, right? So let's go ahead and start off by I want you to share a little bit about you and how you ended up specializing helping women to feel more balanced and, by helping to balance out her hormones.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Erica. Look, to be truthfully and just transparent, I never, ever wanted to treat women's health, ever. I remember I had a business partner at the time when we opened up the practice, and I said to her one day, I never want to treat women's health. Women are hormonal, they're moody. Like, why would I want to do that all day long? It doesn't sound fun at all. Like every single patient talking about their hormones. No, thank you. Um, and I remember saying, "Oh, I think I just want to specialize in gut health," and not really putting two and two together because you can't really separate out your hormones and your gut health. So, what then happened over the course of several years is I was inundated with women who wanted help with their hormones and specifically fertility. And we're talking nearly 20 years ago, and complementary and alternative medicine in fertility, or in actually even Western medicine, really didn't have much in the way of answers for women who were seeking help with their fertility. And so I remember saying to some of these patients, I don't actually know. I mean, I've studied at length. I'd been at university full time for 10 and a half years. Like, I'd studied a long time,
Wow.
and I didn't know the answers to their problems. And so I got curious, and remember saying to patients, I don't really know, but nor does your doctor. So let's give this a go and see if we can figure it out. And really, what I over time was able to discover through not just many patient encounters, but also curiosity, research, reading, experimenting, was that all of the symptoms that women were experiencing were a direct result of our modern lifestyle. But science and medicine hadn't caught up to that yet at all. And to suggest that stress was impacting your hormones was absolutely wild. It's like, oh, that's not happening. That they aren't independent of each other when actually they are so influential. So from there, because we started to help women, we were completely like just women flocked to us. And I wasn't ready for that at all. I was really young in my career. And we had the pleasure of helping hundreds, thousands of women really quickly. And then it just grew from there. And here we are. It is nearly 20 years on, which feels crazy because I don't feel like I don't feel like I'm old enough for that, but I actually am more than old
Well,
enough.
Nat, that's amazing. It's so interesting in life how what we're like meant to be or meant to do, right? It finds us because I feel the same way with what I learned, right? University background, as great as it is, it leaves so many holes in everything.
It
So that's
really
that's
does. And
awesome, the work you're
it
doing.
thank you. And it's really interesting because now there are many hormone experts, there are many fertility experts. And I started with fertility, but what I figured out was that if I just when I was writing my first book, Well and Good, I had this epiphany. I was like, I'm trying to fix them when they're down the road. And if I could actually have helped these women when they were younger, when they first had symptoms, probably when they were teenagers, and we didn't
Mhm.
just mask it with birth control and we actually looked at what was fundamentally happening, then we wouldn't have the fertility epidemic. And so that was what led to the next book, which was geared more towards teenagers and young women, because I really felt that women didn't get the education that they needed to understand their body. And then it's been an evolution since then. And then through my own experience and being at an age where I'm, perimenopausal, it just lends itself to actually let's just start at the beginning, puberty, and we'll just help everybody. And that's really what's happened. And it's been extraordinary.
That's amazing. No, I so wholeheartedly agree with you. As someone who has a teenage daughter, and I think it's where it needs to start. I talk to her about the things that I know that affect her periods, right? And so that they don't have, she doesn't have to deal with the stuff that I dealt with at her age, right? I was a person that had crazy ovarian cysts and so much pain around my periods. And at the time, like they didn't even know. They're like, well, you have to deal with it. Take Motrin, right? And like mask the pain from it. But we now know today that it's that is a sign of things going on. I always tell my daughter, I'm like, hey, if you start feeling crampy, you start having pain, like you need to tell me because that can be indication that we need to improve something. So can we kind of start there, Nat? So for the ladies listening, because I obviously have a lot of moms, they may not have teenagers, they may be past that, but some of them may have littler ones. And obviously I know what we talk about in this period as well applies well to everybody. But of course, if we can start
I
younger,
think it's so important. It,
prevention.
yeah, it's so important to have this conversation. And I think it's the missing part. And it doesn't matter if you have no children, young children, you have older children, you're a grandparent, you have a next door neighbor, you have a friend at work. It's important that we look at our own behaviors, I think, first and foremost, because if I'm sitting here and my daughter's nearly 15 and I'm having a horrible period every single month, why would she want to have a period in the first place? If my example is I'm debilitated, it's debilitating, I'm in bed, I can't talk to anybody, leave mum alone. So I think it's really important that we firstly look at ourselves and what our body is telling us and what are the clues. And then we encourage the younger generation to do the same. The other thing I'm very passionate about is having age appropriate conversations with our children at the moment that they start to ask the questions about their reproductive health and their gynecological health, because we're very good at pretending it doesn't exist. Even mummy, where did I come from? Oh, go and ask your dad. Like, that's not an answer. Or the stork brought you. That's horrific to think that at some point you were flying through the sky in a bird's beak and you just got put on the doorstep. These are opportunities for us to open the conversation and start to have age appropriate conversation and allow that to be this evolution, that this conversation that evolves over time, so that by the time you're 13, 14, 15 and you get your first period, it's not taboo, it's not scary, it's just something that happens. Sure, you can be curious about it, but it allows for these layers of conversation rather than this bomb that is dropped on us as a 13, 14-year-old whenever you find out about these things. And don't think kids aren't talking about it anyway. They are. So we'd rather them have truthful information, right? So that's the first thing. Like, how can we actually know enough about ourselves to be able to be open and honest with our children, have age-appropriate conversation, enroll them in it, and it doesn't need to be off limits or taboo. And the next thing I'll say to that is the biggest issue that I spend more time helping women get their hormones back online after being on birth control than I do anything else, really. And often it's at around the age of 16 that young women are actually prescribed birth control without looking at to the reason outside of contraception. If there is problems that are happening and they aren't having or experiencing pain-free, non-problematic cycles, then, we have to look at why that's happening. And it's really normal at around the age of 16 for girls to go through a period of time where their body mimics what looks like PCOS. So often their cycles are irregular, they'll gain a little bit of weight. And as mothers, what do? We panic. We're like, oh, this doesn't look right. So we go to the doctor and the doctor says, oh, look, let's just put you on birth control so that we can manipulate your cycle. You don't ovulate when you're on birth control and you don't get a period. You get a withdrawal bleed. And this is really problematic. Also, the pill depletes the body of vitamins and minerals. It upsets your gut health. Like, there's so many other parts to it that we don't talk about. However, the biggest thing that we have to understand is that our sex hormones don't mature until around the age of 21. Let's say you're using birth control from the age of 16. it flatlines your hormones. It doesn't allow your hormones to continue to mature. And so if you're 16 and you start birth control and at 30 you decide you want to transition off to have children, you are as hormonally mature as your 16-year-old self, which means that you've
Wow.
got a lot of catching up to do. And that's problematic for a lot of women because they already had issues at 16 that went unresolved, and they haven't made the connection as the 30-year-old with their moods, with their heavy bleeding, with their skin, with whatever the symptoms might be. They were already there as clues when they were 16. They just needed to be addressed then, and they've gone all that time without being addressed, and that doesn't change. That's still underlying in the background. So even though you might be controlling your cycle, the other symptoms that exist because of the imbalances that you might have can very often still be there. So your body is talking to you all the time. And if you can listen to the cues or find someone that can help you listen to the cues, it doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. There are so many things you can do, and it will benefit you for every phase moving forward, including fertility, including perimenopause, including menopause, including postmenopause. And it's important that we think about the big picture because we have an option to feel great. We don't have to have issues. So I'm really passionate about that because I think a lot of women don't know that. And it's not your doctor's fault. Medicine meets you where you're at. And so if there's not a drug for it, then what is your doctor going to do? They want to give you a solution. That's their job. So it is really important to understand, I think, that the system is fundamentally flawed in the sense of it's not fixing anything. And that contraception shouldn't be a solution for issues outside of contraception.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my goodness, Nat, there's so much there to unpack.
And that's that. I'll just step off my box now.
Oh no, no, I love it. It's great. So I definitely want to have talk about birth control. I guess I think that it is so easy that women are just put on it, and then as they learn more, they feel like, okay, well, what do I do? Right. So I feel like for probably most of my ladies listening, they may not be on birth control anymore because they're in that stage of having babies, or maybe they're back on it post babies, or maybe they are off of it completely because their husband's had a vasectomy, which I'm always chime in
Mm-hmm.
while I mention that. Like, that's what I always suggest. Are you on board with that with women? I'm like, once you're done having babies, because women going back on birth control after having babies is a disaster from what I've ever
I know.
experienced. And I
I
hear from
mean,
other women as well.
yeah, totally. I think I mean, I'm a big fan of understanding your cycle. I'm a big fan of teaching young women to understand their cycle as well so that they can then learn it and know it. Once you understand your cycle, as hippie and woo woo as it might sound, it's you can't get it wrong. So when someone says to me, I don't trust myself, first of all, I'm heartbroken. I'm like, you don't trust yourself? Who can you trust if you can't trust yourself? I don't trust myself to understand my cycle. You're typically fertile for 3 or 4 days every cycle. If you know when they are, then you can be mindful and careful at those points in time if you don't want to conceive. So I had this yesterday. Someone said to me they're petrified that their daughter is going to fall pregnant. Their daughter is 17. What do you do? Should I put her on birth control? And I said, well, look, I can't answer that. And please understand, I'm not here to say don't do something. I'm here to say have information, make an informed choice for yourself. But in terms of understanding your cycle, we can call this fertility awareness, we can call this body wisdom, we can call it cycle tracking, whatever you want to call it. If I know this, I mean, I laugh now. I'm like, I can't not know it. So I mean, for me to have an accident would be I'd have to be blind drunk and passed out for that to happen because I know it's very obvious when I'm
Mhm.
fertile. So once you start to become aware of that, you can't really get it wrong. And then, it's a matter of using barrier methods. And I would be encouraging any young woman to be using barrier methods. STDs are really problematic. And so I said to this person, look, my plan for Olivia is to teach her cycle. My plan for any woman is to teach them their cycle, no matter what age they are. And then use that information. If you are if you're ovulating and you're in your fertile window, then you use a barrier method or you don't be intimate. Like, um, like really, you're a big
Yeah.
person. And then, really, if an accident should happen, that's when I would use plan B at that point in time. I don't advocate for that. I don't think that's the best option, but you have options. And it would be far better to do that than be on birth control all of the time in terms of the impact that has. Once we finish having children, then of course a vasectomy is a great idea. But you know what happens? Women are often at this point in time so aware of their body that they don't necessarily need to even suggest that because they've worked out this rhythm that they have and their partner understands it too, and there's no accidents. I mean, I've been practicing fertility awareness for 20 years. I have two children. They were conceived the month that I tried for each of them. I haven't wanted to have any more children and we haven't had any accidents, and I don't think that's sheer luck. I think that's actually just knowing my body. And thousands of women practice that as well. So you've got
Mhm.
options, and it's not
Yeah.
birth control. I mean, what it does to your brain, let alone what it does to your hormones, is like wild. And the research suggests that we're a different version of ourselves because we're not experiencing the changes over a month that our hormones initiate. And those changes aren't negative, they're positive. They have a positive impact on generally have a positive impact on our life. And yeah, okay, you might have a day or two where you don't feel great in the lead up to your period. You might be more tired, you might be more hungry, you just need a bit more inward time. It shouldn't be a wild ride. That's again telling you that there's a bigger issue. Your hormones are actually running the show. So there's so many facets to that question, but
I
I
know.
think I just think we have to think outside the box of birth control. And I can't even imagine that if every single woman on the planet was suppressing their hormones with birth control, what that would look like for women, because it makes us see the world differently. We see the world more platonically. We don't have the same connection with children and babies. And it's just because it changes our brain as well. It means that we kind of are just meh, like, nah.
Yeah.
We don't get the joy of, ovulation when we come out and we're social and we feel good and we look good. And there's reasons that the cycle has ebbs and flows to it. And really connecting with that, I think, is also really important.
I think you said something really, really important that I want to reiterate, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about it. And that is really knowing your body, listening to your body. And I think so much, and I think it's so much of like we're in this go, 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 do everything, multitasking life, right? That so many live, that it's like the period slows us down, or if like we don't feel amazing every day. And sometimes we let that almost be a reason, and then we don't like that. And when we're like you kind of said a little while ago, was, we have maybe experienced other women in our lives not having great periods. That was me growing up. And now, like, to be honest, like mine started this morning and I'm like, oh, great. I mean, I knew it was going to start. It's right on track because I've done so much work on my body to get out of all those problems that I used to have. And it really does. I mean, I always say track your period, track your period. And if you start to feel things coming up and you want to get maybe a little angry at something, like take a pause and like see where you're at in your cycle. And when you start to recognize those things, I feel like it empowers you so much more, because instead of like maybe blaming someone else for something, or things can escalate, when you turn inward and be like, oh yeah, my period's going to start tomorrow or in 2 days, and I'm noticing I'm a little more moody. So one, maybe there's some stuff you can do about it, but maybe it is time for you to like have a little less in your schedule or whatever it is. And I just think we need to take a step back and live more cyclically. Is that the right word?
Yeah.
With our cycles. And I know even for women who don't have cycles, um, is the moon. Is that what you also tell women,
Yeah.
is follow the cycle of the moon as well? So I think all that
Absolutely.
is
And,
so fascinating.
it really is. So, I mean, I know that a lot of my work requires me to be quite creative and quite social. And, showing up on Instagram or social media and seeing patients and Anyway, but I know that 2 days before my period, my creativity is in the toilet. Like it is gone. Now, before I had an awareness, I used to think, oh my gosh. And, I'd be writing books and doing things, and I'd be thinking, oh my gosh, who am I if I'm not creative? This is not me. It's gone. This is stressful. I need to find my mojo, sit down and try and push through, until I realized if you just wait 2 days and you wait for your period to arrive, your creativity comes back, Nat. So actually,
Yeah.
it's just a time to sit it out. You don't actually have to be that person in those days, knowing that it doesn't flow easily in those days. So I think the issue is, whether it's because of birth control flattening hormones, whether it's because we we still operate as tiny men, and that's the other issue. Their cycles are 24 hours, and God bless them, that's great, but we're not. We're different every single day of our cycle. And so whether it's that society has had us, that we've put ourselves in a position where we want to be equal and we want to be the same, we're not the same. And that's a problem in itself. And so you don't have to push on. And if you can take the time to stop for however long it needs to be for your body, and we're all different, and just do what your body needs to do in those days, it is a completely different approach than banging your head against a wall and then thinking something's wrong with you and then letting that frustration pent up. And then, so I, just like you, if I know where I am in my cycle, it will make sense to me, and I can give myself the grace to stop, to do less, to appreciate where I'm at. And it's far less stressful doing that as well, let me tell you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, stress. Let's talk about stress for a little bit. I know you
Oh, yeah.
you mentioned kind of when you were talking about like everything that kind of led you to this, right? How we used to not acknowledge stress and that and its impact on our hormones.
Mm.
And I mean, everyone is so stressed. I've done a lot of work on myself, as I'm sure you have as well. And
Yeah.
it's like everyone is stressed. And I recognize that so many people our baseline of stress is heightened. And then you add stress on top of stress and it just compounds. So
So true.
what do you tell ladies who you can just feel they're exuding their stress as soon as they walk into your office?
I'll tell you the first thing I don't tell them, and it's, oh, just relax. Because the last time someone told you to just relax, I'm pretty sure you wanted to biff them one in the face. Like, that is not helpful. It's often the advice of elders, just relax, you'll be fine. So that's not what we would do. I think the first thing that we must do is we have to get conscious that we are stressed. We're very good at, I'll ask women, and it's a really silly question, to be honest, but we have to do it. How stressed are you? Which is, how do you answer that? Like on a scale of 1 to 10, or, in conjunction with the moon and the stars? Like, but truthfully, if you really stop and think about it, how stressed or overwhelmed, I like to use the word overwhelmed, how
Mhm.
overwhelmed do you feel? And most women will say, oh, I cope fine with stress. And I'm like, that's not the question. The question is, how stressed out are you actually? And so I get women to do an exercise where I want them to become conscious of their stress. So by the time I see them for their next appointment, I'll say, okay, can you become conscious at least? And when you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed, you can actually admit to yourself, oh, Nat, I'm feeling stressed at the moment. Like I actually am feeling stressed right now. Interesting. And because you can't do anything with it if you're not conscious of it.
Mhm.
And not only that, how many times can I get you, or how many pockets can I create within your day where I take you into conscious and being conscious about it? Because the more I can do that, the more you can actually have that internal conversation and say, okay, hang on a minute, I am feeling really overwhelmed. Does this warrant me to feel like this right now? Or am I just choosing this because I continue to choose to feel overwhelmed and stressed because it gets me an outcome? Because it got me an outcome yesterday and I left everything to the last minute, or whatever it might have been. So the first thing is to just create some awareness around it. That what we need to also realize is that our stress hormones compete with our sex hormones. So high cortisol will have an impact on your hormones that doesn't feel good necessarily. It will either rob from progesterone or it'll drive estrogen crazy, and that can cause various cycle imbalances. And whether that looks like, heavy painful periods, or it might look like PMS symptoms, including, headaches in the lead up to the period, sore breasts, spotting, mood swings. That is so often a correlation of stress hormones and sex hormones, and stress hormones robbing from your sex hormones. Because let's face it, your cortisol and your adrenaline, your stress hormones are there to help save you, but they're not supposed to be secreted in the amounts that we're experiencing, because we are reactive to our modern lifestyle. So it's really important to get conscious around it, and it's really important to understand that just because you're stressed doesn't actually mean you're going to be successful in whatever you're trying to do. In fact, you can be calm and successful. You can then figure out the next layer is, how can I actually do less and achieve more? Could I be more productive, actually achieve more, keep everything, somewhere where I don't feel like it's spiraling out of control? Many women wouldn't even recognize what that looks like anymore. So it doesn't have to be difficult. I just want you to stop and be like, yes, I am overwhelmed. Interesting. Do I need to be? Because actually, I'm stressing about what to cook for dinner. It doesn't really matter in the scheme of things. I can find something to cook, I'm pretty sure. Things like a terrible news of a loved one, or a job scenario, those things warrant stress. That's okay. You're allowed to use your stress for those things. But let's not use stress for reasons that really don't warrant it, and become aware to be able to compartmentalize it, to use it as a superpower. It can actually take you exactly where you want to go, so long as you learn how to nurture it properly.
So well said. I just feel like it's so driven, right? It's like go, go, go. And
it's the tiny men thing again. It's the tiny men thing again. It really is. It's like, we don't have to work like that. In fact, we can work smarter and not harder. We just,
yes,
we've put ourselves in a corner when it comes to what we need to do, or what it looks like we need to do to perform. And we actually don't need to do that. We actually are very good at getting it done in our own way. And you find that if you can sync in that with your hormones and your cycle, and get it done at the times where you're in peak performance, you don't need to do it at the other times.
Yeah, just doing that, just syncing up with your cycle could decrease your stress like a tremendous amount. So ladies, start tracking your cycles. If you're not, you should be.
I cannot stress that enough. I can't. Yeah. And I just don't even, yes, tracking your cycle is an absolute game changer, because you can also look and go, warranted. I feel awful. Fair enough. I'm at that time in my cycle where if I haven't looked after myself, I am going to feel awful. That's actually a direct correlation. That is my body doing exactly what it's supposed to do under the circumstances.
Yeah.
That's it. What if your body was actually just doing what it's supposed to do under the circumstances? And so rather than hating on it and being like, so frustrated, my body doesn't ever do what I want it to do, I'm always this, that, and whatever, have a look at what's actually happening. Have a look at where you're at in your cycle. Have a look if you're being kind to yourself, and draw the correlation between that. And then there's some choices that need to be made as well.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go in and talk about some of that. So for our ladies listening that have some rougher periods, where do you start with someone? What's kind of your go-to initial? I mean, I know there can be a lot of root causes, but what's kind of some of your initial go-to suggestions for ladies when they've got the heavy period, right? That's the most common, is the heavy periods. And
I think it's first and foremost knowing where you are and what phase of life you're in, because our cycles naturally change over the course of our menstruating lives. And there's not a lot of thought put into this. I still see women who are in their mid-30s and they'll say, my period's really light and it's short. Is there something wrong? And I'm like, no, enjoy it. It's supposed to be like that at this point of our lives. Like, so, your period when you first get it It's usually something that's a bit of, I mean, it's a 7 day event, right? It lasts for a longer time. It's just finding your hormones and your brain and your ovaries are just finding that connection. They're getting used to the cyclic nature of that. And like I said, up until around 21, it's pretty normal for them to be somewhat irregular until they find their groove. Then we move into our fertile years. So it tends to be, and you can have problems at all of this time, and I'll touch on that in a second. But it tends to be, a 5 to 7 day bleed, and there's more of a rhythm to it. And then by the time we get to our mid 30s, our periods do start to get lighter and shorter. And that's good. That's what they're supposed to do. It doesn't mean you're not fertile. And it doesn't mean that there's a problem. It's just the nature of what's happening with our hormones. And then we move into a phase beyond that where they're likely going to get heavier and more sporadic or fluctuate. And then we move into menopause. So knowing that is really important, I think, first and foremost. Then looking at the what your period is actually telling you is the best clue to the internal landscape of your hormones in your body. And so that can be our each month, that can be how we check in to see what's happening and what our body is reporting to us. I like women to use the period as the gauge. And it's not that hard. It's pretty easy, actually. It's either going to be one of three things. You're going to either have a light period, a normal period, or a heavy period. And looking at what the variation of those really allows you to see more than likely what your estrogen is doing. And estrogen is the foundation for the cycle because estrogen builds your lining. Without enough estrogen, we don't get we sort of don't then lead into ovulation. And then what happens on the other side is we start to make progesterone as a result of that. So this is why I love this simple way of looking at things. What is your period telling you? Is it heavy? Is it medium? Is it light? If it's light, it tells you there's not enough estrogen. And if it's heavy, it tells you that there's possibly too much estrogen. What is a heavy period? I would say needing to change a pad or tampon more than every 4 hours is a sign of a heavy period. I also have women that come in and they'll have a light period. They'll say, oh, I could probably not change anything all day. I don't do that because of hygiene, but there's really not much there. That is really light. That's so that 4 hour window is a really great way to gauge what that looks like. And if it's something either side of that, then let's look at what your estrogen is doing, because that really then allows us to look at the rest of the cycle. Now, there can be other variations of that: PCOS, long cycles, amenorrhea, no cycles. They're all signs and clues as well. But for the majority of women, looking at the period itself really does give you the clues. I would say 80% of my patients are estrogen dominant. And that is that they have too much estrogen. And the first question I'll say is, do you have heavy period? Yes, I do. Right. Then we go down that rabbit hole because that's already told me that you're likely got too much estrogen. Now, why do we have too much estrogen? Like you said, it's a product of we're a product of our environment. It's the high stress, it's the exposure to toxins and chemicals. There's a external element to our rising estrogen levels, but there's also the internal element to it. That's how well is our gut how well is our gut metabolizing our hormones, how well is our liver detoxifying our hormones, and how well are we able to eliminate excess hormones. Because if those three mechanisms aren't working properly and you've got estrogen sitting in the bowel, it's going to just be reabsorbed and add to the estrogen pile. So very quickly, I can put women in one of two camps: not enough estrogen, too much estrogen. Too much estrogen, we need to clear it. So think of the bowels. Not enough estrogen, we need to nourish and support it so that we can actually then have what we need to then go on and support a menstrual cycle. And I often see women who are low in estrogen, they could have used birth control for a long time, and that's the reason why they have a lighter period. It could be genetic. There's many reasons, but it's also figuring out why. So using the period as a report card and then coming in and observing that, and again, it's just those clues that we're talking about. What is your body telling you? And then what can we do with that? Often a heavy period comes with pain, but also a light period can be very painful too, because if you don't have the flow and things aren't moving, And we can see light periods in endometriosis because the blood's not flowing in the right direction, which can be extremely painful. Then we need to look at that as well. And there's other clues that we can use and questions that we can ask ourselves. So really being curious as to what are the symptoms, and it paints a different picture, and it allows us to look at our body in a different way rather than thinking that your body is against you. All of a sudden you can have this appreciation. Oh my goodness, it's trying to show me something. And
Yes.
I just haven't been listening all this time.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm always preaching that. I'm like, listen to your body. And because so many times I hear from women, it's like they get frustrated, they get mad at their body, right? Because it's not doing what they want it to do. And I also think there's this element of, even once women start to learn, they then want it to happen yesterday, right?
I
And
know.
it takes time. Can you address that a little bit? Especially, I mean, I'm sure all aspects, but again, the estrogen dominance being a big thing, and how that can, what do you, I mean, everyone always
I
asks me,
want to
Erica,
say,
how
I
long
want
does
to
it kind of
say,
take? You know?
you know what's interesting is I find when someone's estrogen dominant, it's pretty easy to clear estrogen quickly and for them to feel better pretty quickly. Then it's just time spent doing it. So we want to, first of all, start to regulate estrogen better, start to eliminate estrogen better, and you will feel the difference from one cycle to the next. That doesn't mean you just stop. It's actually then time spent doing what you've already been doing to then allow the body to you're creating a new normal for your body, or showing it or allowing it to operate to its best. And it can get a bit confused. It can go, I'm really so not used to operating this way, and it's really good, but is it, you know, it can lean back in if you haven't actually really reestablished that. So once you've got once you can see that it's working, then it's just time spent continuing to do what you're doing. So it is easy to clear estrogen. It's not so easy to build it and support it. So I say to patients, you know, if you're deficient, that's going to take a little bit more time, because that's the rebuilding of the gut integrity. That's the rebuilding and nourishment of vitamin and mineral stores. That takes time to replenish. We're not just trying to clear something. It takes time to rebuild that. So, you know, I think it's important to recognize that this is not a take a pill and forget about it. Nothing ever is, even though that would be
No.
lovely. But the thing that I want to get women to do is, what's the least amount that you need to do to see the most amount of change? Because if I can get you to be consistent in something, then I know we're going to see a positive change. And it's not necessarily that you're going to hear, if you really go down the rabbit hole, you will hear so many things that you can do to support your hormones. You could take vitamin E. You could, you could. There's so many things, actually. Let's not just start with vitamin E, because there are so many things that you can do, right? You know, you're going to get so many opinions. Take DIM. Make sure your bowels are working. Regulate your blood sugar. What about insulin resistance? Like, I could go on and on and on. It's actually about picking something and becoming consistent with it. And that's actually how we make the change. It doesn't matter what it is necessarily, so long as it's appropriate. But if I say, got you to increase your fiber and go for a walk every day, now that's not revolutionary, but I can tell you that if you did it, the results for you would be revolutionary. Because if you could consistently start to do that, and it's simple. We make it harder than it needs to be. It doesn't have to be difficult, and it doesn't have to be overwhelming. It just needs to feel good and feel right, and then you'll keep on doing it. And then you'll be like, where has fiber been all of my life? I didn't know it was this simple. So it's not just necessarily fiber. Maybe it is, but it's just finding a couple of key things that we can get you to do to be consistent, to create a new way so that you can feel better. Once you start to feel better, then you're going to want to add layers to that. You'll start to be like, what else can I do? What's the next thing I can do? But if you're overwhelmed and stressed, it can feel, starting a new regime or a new routine without the right support can feel really overwhelming and stressful. So if you're listening to this and going, okay, gosh, where do I start? Start with your bowels. What do we need to do to get your bowels working better? And start with your stress levels. Can you start to get conscious around that? And if you were to just do those two things, you're going to feel remarkably better in a very short amount of time.
Absolutely. Okay, so now I have a question. I know you said there's, a lot of things, but what is your perspective on animal protein and hormones? Because I know I get women who are like, I'm vegan or vegetarian. And I always encourage women, like, we need to boost our intake of animal protein because, I mean, personally, I feel so much better. And when I get my clients to eat more animal protein, generally that's the same
Yes.
consensus.
Well, there's certain amino acids in animal protein that doesn't exist in any other protein, and women need it. And so if you're listening and you're like, I'm vegan, I'm vegetarian, that's it, she's just lost me. Just be open to hearing some things. And I can tell you in my experience, it's extremely difficult to treat vegan and vegetarian who are suffering from hormone issues. Now, if you are vegan and vegetarian and you don't have hormone issues,
Mhm.
well, then fantastic. That's working for you. But, if you are vegan or vegetarian and you're like, I'm so tired, my periods are awful, I have horrible cellulite everywhere, my bowels don't work properly, my whites of my eyes don't shine, I don't sleep properly, like, or my periods are really painful. I see a lot of vegans have very painful periods. Then it's not working. And so I always then say to patients, all right, well, let's just work with what we've got. And I can probably take you to a certain place, but I know that you could get to an even better place. And so it's baby steps. We're not saying you should go and eat a cow today. That would probably make you sick. It's baby steps of how we can look at what's going to work for you. But yes, I do agree. And the other thing that we know and research definitely reinforces is as we get older, we need more of it. And so, what you did in your 20s and maybe early 30s no longer works anymore. And we've got to readjust things and figure out what that looks like in our mid 30s and beyond. And that definitely is increasing protein and having protein across every meal is extremely important for your hormones and, well, everything else to function and to feel better and for supporting our muscles. And there's just so many reasons why we need to do that. So I think it is interesting because the pendulum will continue to swing and you can pretty much make any, and don't listen to me, because you can literally make anything make sense, right? If you want to get your point across at why you should be vegetarian, why you should. But I can tell you that after sitting with tens of thousands of women that right across the board, those that have been at their sickest and their worst, and we've been able to get them to reintroduce meat and meat protein, that's been the game changer. That's been the actual factor that's got them over the line. So it can be difficult to hear that as well if you've been vegetarian or vegan for a long time. But that's been my experience, and that's what the research supports as well.
Yeah, that's what I see as well. So I think it comes down to start with one thing, right? If you're only
Yeah.
eating a little protein at one meal, start eating it at a second meal. And then,
Mm.
you don't have to do
I
a
think,
180
yeah,
with things.
yeah, it is. It's really difficult. And like I said, we don't have the metabolic flexibility that we did when we were 20 in our mid
Hmm.
30s. And it gets to a point where it becomes a scenario of holding on to what you've got because you can't ever go back. And so we need to at some point realize that what I'm actually doing now is keeping my body in a state of maintenance. I'm holding on to what I can for longevity. And because it does decline, everything starts to change. And how can we support our hormones through that process so that we're not left with nothing in the tank? And this is where nutrition is absolutely paramount at this point. We get to a point where we can't skimp on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Nutrition is everything, and animal protein can change your life. And even if you are eating animal protein, checking into how much you're eating because you may need to dramatically increase it. And I've heard such ranges. Do you have a recommendation that you recommend? Like, do you say like a
Yes,
gram per kilogram, like per pound? What are where do
yeah,
you
there's
stand?
lots of those. I mean, it depends on where you're at. As a general rule, I would say you're wanting to have around 25 grams of protein per meal, give or take,
Okay.
depending on what you're trying to achieve. So that's protein. So let's say a chicken breast, a 100-gram chicken breast has about 27 grams of protein. So you're looking at, I would say a fist-sized piece of protein if it's a piece of meat at every meal. And it really is a game changer, but it's very hard to get our head around eating protein at every meal. And it's also very hard to, again, when we were younger and we wanted to maintain a certain physique, we ate less, exercised more. As we get older, we actually need to eat more and exercise less. It doesn't mean no exercise. It means the right type of exercise because we've changed. And so this is, I think, where a lot of women really feel confused and confronted. They're like, what I did when I was 20 no longer works. However, eating more sounds frightful.
Yeah.
Like that's so scary to me because I'm so scared that I'm going to get to a point where I gain weight that I can never actually then get back to where I was before. Also remembering that your healthy weight and your ideal weight might be polar opposites. So it's really looking at where your healthy weight lies as well and how close to that you are. Things do change and that can be really confronting. So adjusting our nutrition to support that. But there are calculators that you can use to work out how much protein that you need. I think roughly for me, I try not to complicate it for patients. I'm like, I know that if I can get you to be having 100 grams of protein, maybe you need a little bit more at every meal. That would be a game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great ballpark idea.
It's a great ballpark idea. And then you
Yeah.
can go down the rabbit hole of working out what that exactly looks like for you if you wanted to track macros. But I think for the majority of us, we're busy. And if we knew that we needed a rough guide, give or take, then that, but increasing protein really does have a positive impact on many
Yeah, I
factors.
wanted to I wanted to add a comment when you were saying, because women do get afraid to eat more food. They're like, "Oh my gosh, if I eat more food, I'm going to gain the weight." But actually, ladies, it can help to boost your metabolism and fuel your muscles and your bones and repairing and all of that. So like just that reminder, I mean, I can't tell you, and I know you obviously you see it too, but when I get women to actually eat more like quality food with animal protein, they feel better. And if you've got weight to lose that needs to be lost, like you can see that weight start to slowly come off in a
Mm.
healthy way. Then also on the flip side of that with the exercise, because you like took the words right out of my mouth, Nat, because working with women is so many women, especially if you come from an athletic background, like working out a lot when you were younger may have worked. It still may not have worked. It actually may have contributed to stress in the body, right? Depending on what you were
Mm.
doing. But I want to hear from you because we talk a lot about movement on the podcast. So, what do you recommend for your ladies to, from an exercise movement perspective, that really you see helps support their hormones, but isn't overdoing it, depleting them?
Yeah, I get women. We did a masterclass not too long ago. We have a library of masterclasses. It's my favorite thing to do. We did one on weight management. And what I think that the missing piece so often is actually profiling women to understand their hormone type and then move according to their hormone type. So in my experience, profiling again their symptoms to work out, am I estrogen dominant? Am I low estrogen? Am I excess testosterone? Am I high cortisol? Like, where do I sit? And then how do I move my body accordingly and nourish my body accordingly? And that masterclass then went through and actually helped them. Once they had the category, then I could tell them how to exercise in a way that was going to support them. So, for example, a woman with PCOS actually really benefits from less movement, but that doesn't mean no movement, as opposed to a woman who's estrogen dominant or perimenopausal. Like it's very different. So, ideally, I say to patients, if I can get them to lift something heavy 3 times a week, that's a good place to start. I'm more interested in you lifting something than I am you. It depends on the cardio. We all still need to do some level of movement, but the incidental movement that you do most days, especially if you can start to track it in some way, then you can start to see just how much you are moving your body or how much you are not. So what does that look like in an ideal scenario? 3 lifting sessions a week of some type of description. I mean, I work out these days at home, and that's so freeing that I don't have to carve out an hour to get myself ready, go to the gym, organize babysitters, then do all of that in reverse. It's like I can actually get up. I've got weights downstairs. I sit in the kitchen and I do a workout. It lasts me 20, 25 minutes. And I know that I've ticked that rather than going, oh, you know what, I've got to get up and go to the gym. I just don't carve out the time to do it. So I bought the gym to me. So if we can do 3 workouts a week of weights, and then, on the in between days, and the recovery days are really important, where you are allowing your body to recover, because that's actually where the magic happens. They're the days that you would be doing your cardio. And when I say cardio, just go for a walk. That's plenty enough. It doesn't have to be, a run or anything too crazy. But the thing I'm actually getting patients to do also is to walk after their dinner, just to help to regulate their blood sugar that one last time for the day. And that also has a really profound impact, but it's a really nice habit to start to set up as well. And again, it doesn't need to be a vigorous workout. It's just going for a walk and moving your major muscles or your bigger muscle groups to help you to regulate your blood sugar, which then has a flow-on effect to your hormones as well. So my ideal would look something like that. But, I think perhaps you'd probably have a even more dialed in version that would help us.
Well, I love your perspective just from the hormone perspective, right? I think it's great. And yes, I am all on board with lifting 3 times a week for sure, because women do need to do the strength building. If we don't practice it, unless our daily life we're super active and moving things around, which most women are not. Although I don't know, sometimes wrangling toddlers
Yeah,
might
I was going to say, I mean, I never had
carrying
a more
babies.
correct. I never had a more fit upper body than when I was picking up children all the time. Like
Yeah.
that is, an effort within itself. So, I mean, we are most of us are moving. But it's good, like I said, it's really good to track it, and it's really good to just see, because we can think we're doing things and we're not actually doing it. So measuring and tracking, I think, is really important. Not just your menstrual cycle, but tracking, your nutrition and your movement. When you evolve to having time to do that, my kids are now 11 and nearly 15, so I have more time for me. Whereas rewind 5 years ago, I didn't have the liberty of that much time. But I want to say, no one's going to make the time for you either. You need to actually do that yourself. And one thing I've observed across women who look like that they do it all, not and do it all with grace and ease, is because they've figured out that they need to carve out this time for themselves. And it doesn't need to be hours and hours, or being indulgent at the spa. It's just carving out time so that I can do my workout, so that I can fill my cup, so that I can sit and eat something, or whatever it might be. And it's not selfish to prioritize those things, because it makes you better at everything else. So this is the one thing I've observed. I've got friends that I'm like, you are actually so awesome. When I watch you, whether you're a mother of 4 or you have this high executive job or whatever it might be, they carve out time for themselves, and that changes everything.
It does. Oh my gosh, you said it so well, because I'm always trying to teach that to all my ladies, because it seems backwards in a sense when we think, oh, it's one more thing on my plate. It's like, no, we have to reframe it the other way around. And you have to look at it just like you said, it's filling your cup so that you can be more supportive for others. If you're running on empty, like your patience, your stress, everything, right? It's like we were talking about with stress. So it's so important. So Nat, well, thank you so much. This has been such a fun and informative conversation. So will you share with everyone where they can find you and learn more about you? And I know you have your amazing membership that you teach all sorts of awesome stuff.
Oh, we're having so much fun in the membership. Come and check that out. Everything's on natkringoudis.com. That's my website, and I'm Nat Kringoudis on socials. But I just love having the conversations and I love hanging out. And yeah, the membership is the masterclasses and the membership has been just an evolution of, I can't necessarily in a consultation spend an hour talking about one thing with women. So this is how we came across it. Well, actually, it was after being my own journey of recovering from COVID because I had long COVID. And that's how it started. I was like, oh gosh, I need to teach people what I've just actually learned. And then we kept on teaching masterclasses. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got this library. Let's make this a membership. So that's really cool. And I think that it's nice to be able to actually really deep dive on one topic and get all the information that we need on one topic, because that never happens in a consultation. You don't have an hour to talk about one thing. I don't have an hour to talk about, your bowels or your inflammation or whatever it might be. So that's how that evolved. But you can find all roads lead to Rome.
Yes, now I will be sure to link everything below so that they can easily find you because you're
Thank
amazing. I
you.
love the work that you're doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.